So my family is from rural Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Some people live in town, others live by the cornfields. The town was always quirky, yet spooky. There were tons of stories, like a Native American killed a man and stuffed him in a tree log. A witch cursed the town because they didn't expect her. There was a Mormon home outside of town that houses the founder for a few months. It was rumored someone tarred one of his followers and left him to die. Anyways, when I was 8, we moved into the town from the country. I didn't feel anything at first, but I always got bad feelings and would run past to the front room of the house. Lights would flicker, things would go missing. Well, my mum is very in tune to her surroundings and definitely has a gift to see things that are not there. My family began seeing a little boy and girl that would run around and play dressed in 19th century clothes. They would wave to people and run up and down the stairs. There was a man who smoked cigars and a lady in red. The little boy once came to my mom and pointed behind her TV to let her know my brother's epilepsy medicine was behind it. I also want to note we lived behind an old 19th century cemetery that was well creepy. So our family went through some hard times living there. A lot of fights between my parents. My brother was busy partying, which made things worse. And I eventually developed a serious drug problem. Mental health was a serious issue in our home. I'm not saying it's the ghost's fault, but it was odd. So we moved out after 10 years of living in the home. That was 10 years ago, and I still have creepy dreams about living in the house. People coming and going and just awful things happening there. Does anyone else have dreams of a childhood home that housed some spooky, otherworldly entities? I feel like part of me is stuck there. I don't know how to explain it. I'm an expatriate living in Japan, in a nice modern home with my wife. This happened about a year ago in our living room. There's a TV in the right corner against the far wall, a giant cat tower in the left corner of the far wall that goes up to the ceiling, and a long picture window between the two, usually with the shades drawn. On the opposite wall is the sofa. My wife and I had gotten 2 kittens a few months previously, and at this point, they were about 5 or 6 months. Playful, but starting to grow out of that phase. That evening, we were sitting on the sofa, and our male cat, Mikey, climbed to the top of the cat tower. After a few minutes, he started to stare at the corner of the wall and bat at a specific section of it. We were debating what he'd found, whether he'd found an insect or was just being a crazy kitten. While we were being entertained by his behavior, the spots he was batting and looking at started to move. He batted at it as he moved over to the other side of the cat tower and batted at the curtains. And then his head tracked it as it moved across the curtains to the other side of the room. He was very fixated on it. When it got to the other side of the room by the TV, the green TV light came on with a faint click, but there was no picture or sound. I was going to point this out to my wife, but I just didn't mention it. A few seconds later, the TV started up. I was just dumbfounded by the weirdness, but my wife was freaked out. If it was only the cat chasing after an invisible object, it wouldn't have been worth mentioning. And if it was only the TV turning on by itself, I would have blown that off. But what happened couldn't have been a coincidence. And that's the only time the TV has ever turned itself on like that. I should mention that I looked around for the remote control right after that happened, and it was on the coffee table in front of the sofa. It hadn't been touched or sat on. Yesterday, Micah came down from upstairs, looked under the sofa, flattened his ears and let out a long hiss. I immediately dropped down and looked under the sofa, but there was nothing. It's completely out of character for him to do anything like that. It got me to thinking about the other time. 6 years ago, my wife and I adopted kittens. When our male was 6 months old, he started playing with something invisible at the top of a floor to ceiling cat tower. We sat on the sofa opposite the cat tower and watched him intently play. I went over and checked to see if he was playing with an insect. He wasn't. We were laughing at him playing by himself. The invisible spot he was playing with started to move across the room. As it moved off the cat tower, he reached his paw way off the cat tower and swiped at it. We watched him track this invisible object with his eyes as it moved to the other side of the room where our TV and air conditioner are. When this object hit the point, the TV power indicator turned on. And then a few seconds later, the picture turned on as well. We were shocked by this, and my wife was very frightened with it all. The TV remote was on the coffee table. In all the time we had the TV, this happened once. Second story. Last summer, I found two newborn kittens who obviously had been abandoned by their mother, crawling in mud and screaming for help. I took them in to foster them, and they miraculously survived. We have a deep and wide windowsill at our porch hallway, and we have a collection of mannequineko, ceramic or plastic cat figurines, arranged in a semicircle on the windowsill. When the two kittens were about 2 months old, I noticed one Saturday all mannequineko, who were in a perfect semicircle on the windowsill, had been shoved off to one side. I mentioned this to my wife, who thought I did it. She kept asking me if I did it as a prank. She was very frightened when she found out I hadn't. Without giving away too much of my private life, I'll say there were people in and out of the house that day, but every single one of them had come to my house before for years, and none of them had ever done anything like this. Which brings the story to a few weeks ago. I had to give one of my cats an emergency poop-related bath, and he got a cold or flu as a result, and spent the full day and the next morning on the sofa. The next morning, with the cat still on the sofa, my wife changed the input channel and got an incredible, bizarre fuchsia pattern on the TV screen. She took a photo of what she saw. My wife and the cat can clearly be seen in the reflection. This is not the same TV as from the first story, but it is in the same spot. My wife wasn't sure how long this would remain on screen, so she quickly grabbed her cell phone and took a picture. She told me she wasn't sure if this was a static pattern or a changing one because she wasn't wearing her glasses. And this lasted until she hit the input button about a minute later, changing the inputs from YouTube to broadcast TV. I wish she'd called me from upstairs or followed up the photo with a video. But that's what happened. For what it's worth, I told her to do that if it ever happens again. I'm 30-some years old. I lived at my mother's house for my whole childhood. No one died there that I know of, and the house was built in the 60s or 70s. Everyone in my house had experiences seeing shadow people. More or less, I wanted to share my experiences because people that haven't had paranormal experiences look at me weird. When I was around 10 years old, my mom and younger sister were all laying in bed. The bed was a bunk bed with a twin upper bed and full-sized lower bed. I was laying next to my mom. My younger sister was up top asleep. My mom and I were reading books and talking occasionally. I heard the floor creak and looked up at the doorway. There was a black figure. Half of their body was in the bedroom, their hands wrapped around the doorway like they were just peeking in. It seemed to be about 5 feet tall. The thing that I remember the most were its piercing green eyes. No one else in my house ever saw that one. The figure we saw the most was a tall, broad, male-looking figure. The reason I say male is because he was really big and wide. You never see anything beside his silhouette. When I was 22, I moved back after having my daughter to live with my mom to help with my dad. He was dying. My dad passed 3 months before the next incident. The figure was not my father. I unfortunately never got to see him. I woke up to make my daughter a bottle. I left the same room as above story and walked into the hallway leading into the living room. The room has big picture windows across the room. The windows give light from passing cars, the moon, or any outdoor light. We were looking at the ground and shuffling through it about 2 or 3 a.m. and looked up and saw the tall, dark silhouette standing about 3 feet from me. He was really big and wore a fedora, wide brimmed hat. I ran to the kitchen and hit the closest light, and he was gone. I didn't think paranormal, I thought intruder. My mother and sister still live there. They experience random things occasionally. We've never been hurt. Anyone ever experienced a piercing green eyes shadow figure or ghost or tall brimmed man? I'm from Yorkshire in the UK, which for as long as I can remember has paranormal events taking place in all manner of aged buildings, including my primary school. My primary school, like many others, claimed to house the spirit of Bloody Mary, and even a Black Mary, but I knew better. I had a habit of sneaking into the building during break time when we're meant to be outside playing. And the first stair you can get to is one that's also meant to be home to a haunted storage room. I've personally fallen for this one when I was like 7, but I've come to realize that it was probably just a draft. But the day I realized this, I had my encounter. I was sitting on the stairs next to said room when I felt like someone was behind me. I looked up the stairs behind me to see a woman dressed head to toe in a black gown walk from where the window at the top of the stairs would be through to the classrooms. I didn't recognize this person and was compelled to follow them, so I got up, stepping every other step on the stairs to catch up to the person. But when I got up there, they were nowhere in sight. Now, I'm a curious person and was even as a child, so I took the risk in getting into trouble for being inside and searched all the classrooms and back rooms. The staff room was a separate building outside, so the odds of teachers being in here were next to none in my mind. And I found no one till the last one, where I found my own teacher just chilling, but they were dressed in normal clothes, nothing like what I'd just seen. I would go on thinking I must have made it up in my head, but I never forgot it. I would go on to find out once I had left that school to go to high school that my previous school was once inhabited by nuns, sisters of faith, as the area's church is just 2 minutes away by foot. And I came to the realization that Bloody Mary had never been in that building, but at least one of the nuns had. I know this isn't like dangerous or hyper exciting, but it's true. It was my first sighting that I know was really and not just something conjured from my mind. I have more from later in my life if people want to hear, including a very weird incident that happened during a lucid paralysis. I appear on the streets of my town centre, dressed casually, suitcase with me. But it's not my town centre. It's my town mixed with the village my partner presently resides in, as well as her surrounding city mashed together in a seamless way. If you didn't know these places intimately, you'd never know this wasn't a real place. I notice, but it's never enough to deter me. My curiosity is too great. After all, my brain is the best stage designer I've ever had the displeasure of meeting. Another male walks up to me, clearly looking for someone, which is perfect, because I know it's me he's looking for, so I don't have to wait any amount of time for this to kick off. Are you the one? He asks nonchalantly. I nod in response. Nice to meet you. You got the keys? They seem genuinely pleased I'm not messing around with pleasantries, when we could be exploring what I already feel is going to be our new home for the foreseeable future. As we approach the door on the side of the building, I notice that it is an amalgamation of a subterranean bar, a church, and specifically a super drug shop, which for those you don't know is a place you'd go for toiletries, makeup, and any basic pharmaceutical needs you have. It's only after the incident is over that I would come to acknowledge how messed up that concept is in practice. Drugs, makeup, and the church. What a beautiful combination you've conjured for me this time. Waiting barely out of sight is my partner. She wants to see the place I'd be staying, since she's likely to be here a heck of a lot. I don't know how I know these things. It's like pre installed information. I just have to assist the disbelief we have our usually greeting rituals. As the guy opens the door and we all enter, I know the stairs bank instantly to the right, but fold back on themselves to a land where there are 5 doors. I never walked through any of them, but I found myself in the room that is situated above the front door to this place. The room is spacious. 2 single beds sit against the headboards against the wall under the window, just waiting to be made. Now, this is where something is clearly off. He introduces himself properly. He seems genuinely nice and interested to get to know me now we are out the way. But I can't hear his name. It's the same as before. I can never hear their names. Even if I ask again, it wouldn't change. It's always. I ignore it because I know why. I don't actually know why, but that pre installed information I was talking about earlier tells me I understand. I explain who the extra person in the room is, and he understands and agrees to let me have pick of the rooms, as he doesn't need as much room as I do, given that my partner is likely to be around a fair bit since they live just around the corner. Literally just around the corner. I could be at theirs in less than 60 seconds if I left now. It's at this point I'm truly aware I'm not in the real world right now. We walked around the other rooms just to see what they were like, but in that moment, I liked the first room best. The first was quite narrow, enough space for an office maybe. It had one of those bunk beds that only have the top bunk. It's definitely not the one. We decided to skip the room in the corner, as it's bound to be a similar shape just based on where it is. That or it's the bathroom. The following room is truly a dream. It somehow has that beautiful autumn morning golden glow, as if there was a suburban street just outside. But that's not possible. We're on the second floor for a start, and there's nothing back there. This building should be connected to the church on this side. So how is this here? She perks up and feels this is the one. I agree, and we go to return to. But this is when everything went straight up to 10. The next thing I know, I flash to the hall and I'm pushed to the floor by this grotesque Caucasian woman with extremely dark, matted, mousy brown hair. They clearly don't have a vested interest in the products they sell in the super drugstore next door. I think the best way to visualize this person is to think of the girl from The Exorcist, age her up to about 1920, and scale back the supernatural scarring on her face and bags under her eyes. She had clearly been sick recently, if it wasn't plastered all over her cheeks. I'm sure I could smell it if I wasn't so distressed. Her eye dilated to the nth degree. She has me pinned by the shoulder. But she isn't my biggest concern. It's the thing behind her. When I first came back to the real world, I thought the woman was the thing, and someone else was attacking me. But I can't remember what this new person looks like at all. It's like there was another person, but there wasn't. I'm convinced I was seeing something they wanted me to believe to hide themselves from my view. I think this is the problem. I saw the darkness for what it was and didn't like it. I firmly believe had I not noticed it, it may have let me kill the girl for its amusement. But I'm good at this. Like I'm really good at this. There was no way I wouldn't notice something invading my headspace without my permission. I'm engulfed with fear and the pressure of that thing lingering, controlling, possessing this person, I feel it all. All her feel, her anger. Oh, fuck her anger. It was so intense, but at the same time, I didn't. I was too focused on not dying. I couldn't wake up despite me vaguely hearing things going on in my real house. I was being forced to go through this. That's when I'm snapped back to this girl, piercing her jagged nails into my shoulders, and my head slams back and I see he's missing. Is he dead? No? I don't see blood or anything. I don't know where he is. He just vanished. It's at that moment that I found him. I glitched again. He is the girl. He and the girl is the shadow, grinning like a sadistic child. Out of nowhere, my arm slowly moves to his throat, and a cake sliced tool in my hand. And slowly but firmly, open up his throat. It's a deep gash and blood just pours out. As soon as I had a second to breathe, the girl was back piercing my shoulders again. But it doesn't last long. This time, it's my throat being opened, but this time by hand. They stood there grinning as my eyes struggled to stay open here, and I tried to force them open in the real world. Slowly taking the slice to their own throats and literally becoming a fountain, they slowly keel over, and then the last thing I saw was her floating past. They are the shadow. They're all over the place right now. They're on the floor, and the shadow passing by me, instilling as much fear as they can before I pass. My partner doesn't do anything the whole time. It's like they aren't there right now, but I feel like they are just out of my point of view. I really hope they just despawned from this world, because I wouldn't want them to feel what I felt. The pressure of all those emotions, the fighting for my life, but the worst is I was locked into it till it was down with me. Apparently the one thing I have control over is my mind. What happens when something else is holding the keys to it? What can you do? A little background. I was a mechanic in the Navy for 6 years. On my second ship, people would talk about a ghost they called Mumbles. Supposedly, Mumbles haunted the engineering spaces, where the ship's engines, generators, and big industrial air conditioners were. They called it Mumbles because you could hear whispering or mumbling over the loud equipment and while wearing earplugs. People also claimed to see a shadowy figure on the late watches, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. or 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. And the general consensus was that this figure was Mumbles. One day, I was cleaning up after I had done some maintenance on the ship's refrigeration units. It was a little after lunch, and I had earbuds in, listening to music. Over the music, I heard somebody whisper, "Frankie." Name changed to protect personal info. Frankie was another mechanic in my division that was an absolute jackass. He was very lazy and played dumb to get out of having responsibilities. I turned around to see if someone was behind me, but no one was there. I continued cleaning and heard "Frankie" again, just a little louder. I don't think anyone would believe me because Frankie was such a jackass, but the few people I told believed in Mumbles and believed my story. A few weeks later, I was filling a tank with water sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight. It was a very long process. I just stood there watching the tank level go up for about 45 minutes. When the tank was finally full enough, I turned to go to the next valve I needed to close, and I saw what was basically a shadow standing up. It stood there for a second, and then ran around the corner to where I needed to close the valve. I just stood there, frozen in fear. When I finally gathered the courage to turn the corner, nothing was there. I never saw or heard from Mumbles again. On the evening of September 7th, 2006, my friend Jen and I were driving home from a friend's house nearby where the Big Ear Radio Observatory used to be. It was somewhere between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m, near the corner of Cheshire Road, and Route 23 between Delaware, Ohio, and Lewis Center, Ohio. We were driving down Route 23, heading south towards Lewis Center, when Jen saw a bright light very distant in the sky. We both joked, saying it's probably a UFO. So we keep driving, and we eventually lose sight and forget about the distant object in the sky. Then, as we're coming over the precipice of the hill, just beyond where the golf course is now, where the telescope once stood, there was an enormous glowing football shaped UFO hanging right above our heads, steadily moving over the top of Route 23 heading towards Lewis Center. It was the most frightening and awe inspiring thing I had ever witnessed. We stopped on the side of the highway and got out of the car. It was the largest thing I've ever seen. I felt like an ant beneath a giant's glowing boot. The object looked like it was engulfed in an orangish or reddish plasma, almost like what the surface of the sun looks like from close up. It looked as though it had flames bubbling and churning within it. I tried to take a video with my Motorola Razr, but the phone just wouldn't pick it up, even though it had just been working fine and nearly had a full charge. It slowly begins to back away from us a bit and begins floating toward the town of Lewis Center. We follow it back to Lewis Center where my friends and I watch it for nearly an hour, and eventually it began to gain altitude. Then, in a dizzying display of lights and flashes, it blasted away in the blink of an eye, leaving behind a wispy blue teal vapor trail. I found out later on that the Big Ear Radio Observatory in Delaware, Ohio, was where they had received the WOW signal in 1977. This object took up a large portion of the visible sky as we came up on it. I'm an airman. I've been trained to observe and identify aircraft. I would estimate the object to be the size of an NFL football stadium, just floating above the three-lane highway and houses and buildings. The object was witnessed by at least 5 people other than myself. As it was gaining altitude, glowing bluish, purplish orbs started cascading out of the main football, cigar-shaped object, one after the other. Each time one appeared, the momentum of which they revolved around the main object intensified, until all I could see was a spinning blue glow around the main football object. And in the blink of an eye, it shot off into a flash of light in front of it, like the Enterprise going to warp speed, leaving only a bluish trail haze behind. The whole experience was the most profound thing to have ever happened to me in my lifetime, up until that point. Back in 2013 or 14, sorry, I can't remember timelines very well, I was out at a restaurant with my family, and when we came home, we found our dog, Bonnie. I don't want to get into specifics about what we saw, but she had fallen ill, which the vet managed to attribute to some sort of infection. Moving forward a short while, unfortunately, it was certain that she wasn't going to get better due to her advanced age, and we had to have her put down. I don't remember much about that day, and I really don't like thinking about it, so I'll get to the point. Obviously heartbroken, I also felt guilty for not being in the room as she'd left us and cried myself to sleep that night. And I remember having a dream where I opened our back door to go into the garden, and I saw Bonnie sat there. I didn't exactly know what to do, but I remember bawling more than I ever have before and hugging her so tight. I'd like to say that it was just a normal dream, but I felt physically strong, which never happens in my dreams. It's like I wasn't in control of what was happening. A few years later, in 2016, my nan had been sent to hospital a few times due to various infections, and I think it was the 4th or 5th time she was admitted to a hospital. A part of me knew that I wasn't going to see her leave that place. At the time, I was in some sort of mental health focus group, and one day a family friend who works there, Anita, kept me behind late after a session, saying that my mum couldn't come pick me up due to traffic or something. I immediately picked up that something wasn't right. Eventually, about 7 p.m., Anita took me home, and when I got through the door, I saw my dad standing in the kitchen, and I'll never forget the look on his face as he told me that the doctors said that my nan was expected to pass away the following morning. Later that night, my family got together to visit her, and she looked completely healthy, like there was nothing wrong with her. She was lucid, and my mum even managed to persuade the nurses to let my nan have a white wine spritzer, which was a favourite drink. She was so damn strong, even towards the end. I remember another patient coughing profusely, to which my nan responded by saying something along the lines of, "Shut up, I'm trying to die." I'm sorry about that tangent. It just feels good to finally tell someone about all this. Anyway, my dad took me and my brothers home to get something to eat. And after dinner, I had a horrible feeling. And even to this day, I regret this decision so damn much. I decided to stay home instead of visiting her one last time. Before I left the last time, I didn't even say goodbye, which I absolutely hate myself for. Instead of seeing her, I decided to write her a note that my mum read to her shortly after she passed away. She left us that night. On to my dream. It was nearly the same as the last. I went through into the back garden to see my nan there smiling at me. So I hugged her as hard as I possibly could until I was forced to wake up the next morning. She knows how guilty I feel about not seeing her and getting to say goodbye. And I'm certain she knows how much I miss her. I just wish I could thank her and Bonnie for giving me one last chance to say goodbye. Anyways, I'm currently 23. I'm one of those people with lots of unexplained experiences, but don't know why it's happening. This is why I'm here. First time I've encountered strange events was when I was about 6 or 7. I was sharing a room with my older sister at the time, and it was late at night. I was woken up by the sound of people walking around the room. As I looked up, there were about 3 or 4 men who looked like shadows, but in 3D. They were talking to each other and turned towards my sister's bed, approaching her. And they started talking really badly of my sister, horrible things they wanted to do to her, things a 7-year-old shouldn't ever know of. It scared me so badly, I pulled the covers over my face, and as I pulled away the covers, they were gone. Needless to say, I was terrified. Second thing that happened was when I was about 10 or 11. It was broad daylight when I came back from school and immediately started doing my homework. I was home alone at the time as my dad went to pick up my sister. Eventually, I heard my dad and sister return home. My father went straight to the living room, placing the car keys on the table, while my sister went into the room I was in. She put her school bag on the floor and started to tease me about my homework. Sisterly stuff such as, "You're just doing your homework, it should have been done earlier," and similar things. I got annoyed and turned around towards her and, you guessed it, no one was there. I looked all over the apartment, but no one was home. My dad and sister hadn't returned yet. I got scared and called a friend to come over. The same friend I called over was a friend who once came to hang out with me and knocked on my door. No one responded, but she stated she heard me playing inside of the apartment. She got mad at me for not letting her in. Luckily, I had my sister to back me up that we weren't home at the time. Third thing that happened was during a summer family vacation. I was about 14 years old when my family rented an apartment near the sea. Unfortunately, the owner's husband just recently passed away, so we couldn't make too much noise out of respect. One night, I was laying in bed listening to music on my earplugs. As I went to switch sides of the bed, I saw a figure of a shadow person standing at the foot of my bed. Again, it was a full 3D shape of a man, but dark as a shadow. I tried to explain it logically, but couldn't. I looked away and back at it. It wouldn't go away. This lasted for a good few minutes when I got up and went to open the doors, asking my parents if I could leave them open. They said yes without any questions. It took me a year to tell them what had happened. I had also encountered similar things in my sleep. A few times, just as I was about to wake up, I'd hear and sense two shadow people next to my bed. Quick, we should go. She's about to wake up. And they would be gone when I awoke. I'm aware this might have just been a dream, and I've never made a big deal of it. I would also experience sleep paralysis and false awakenings quite a lot, as well as strange dreams of the people who have passed away. This started in my teens and goes on till this day. On the topic of dreams, I had also dreamed a few things that actually happened in real life. The biggest one is when I dreamt some apartment I've never seen before. And you guessed it, as I was looking for the apartment I've seen, one just like the one in my dream, and actually rented it. I lived there for about 2 years. The apartment is where my fourth experience happened. I was about 20 years old, and it was daytime when I was doing research for college. Someone knocked on my door. Immediately, I thought it was either my neighbours or the owner of the building, since no one else could enter the house. In order for this to be understood, you'd have to know the arrangement of the building. The entrance is always locked, since there are only 2 apartments, so no one else but us and the owner has the key to the entrance. As you enter, there's a staircase leading up to these 2 apartments. No windows, just a door with a staircase leading up. Back to the story. I go and unlock the door. There's a woman mid to late 20s asking if this is a nail salon. This didn't confuse me that much, since there was a nail salon right next to the building. I explained to her where the salon was, but she just stood there silent with a smile on her face. I got the feeling she wanted me to show her the salon, so I went. This is where it gets strange. We go downstairs and the front doors are locked. I thought, in some weird shape or form, that the doors were left open, so, therefore, she could enter the building, but they were locked. I actually said it out loud. The doors are locked. She just stood there and smiled. I went upstairs to get the key and let her out. She wouldn't leave until I showed the salon with my hand, right there. She left. A few days later, I asked my neighbours if they let someone in or somehow left the doors open, and then went and locked it later. They responded negatively. I didn't want to go into too much detail as I didn't want to freak them out. These are basically the bigger, unexplained things that have happened to me. I'd also experienced smaller ones, such as phantom smells. I'd smell flowers and candles, like at the funeral. Once I called over a friend to smell it, and she could smell it too, stating it was a very uncomfortable smell.